Mason pulled himself up out of the pool, a little dazed but driven by hunger. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but he knew he needed to eat. He dried himself and pulled his clothes back on, climbing the stairs wearily. He opened the basement door cautiously, checking for sunlight, but all was dark. He eased through the door and stopped in the kitchen. It was too quiet. Not that she had been loud, exactly. Her presence could fill the house, and now that she was gone, the silence was empty. He pulled bread from the cupboard and ham from the refrigerator, throwing together a sandwich to satisfy the hunger inside him. His time in the dark had given him insight into what was possible, but did nothing for his practical knowledge. There was more to learn than he had ever imagined. It all bubbled there inside him, and he had no idea what to do with it all. Once he was done with his sandwich, he checked the time. It was nearly 1 a.m. It gave him time to do what needed to be done. He let himself out into the night, pausing to appreciate the smell of damp earth and pine sap. It was the smell of home. Grabbing a shovel from beside the house, Mason headed down the dirt path into the woods. The clearing that was home to the Jerah family's earthly remains was small and well hidden. His mother was buried there, her stone small and carved by his father's own hand. His father and a brother Mason had never known lay there as well. His great-grandparents both were buried in the center of the plot, the only formal headstone adorning their grave in the tiny cemetery. Mason paused in respect, closing his eyes and feeling inside him for the lingering presence of those who were buried here. His Nana would want to be buried with her husband. Mason turned to his grave, marked simply with a small cairn, and set his shovel to the earth. It was hard work, the earth heavy with recent rains, but Mason found it comforting to lose himself in the physical labor, and he dug his way down to the linen shroud wound around his grandfather's remains. Mason had loved spending time with the old man when he was small, following him around as he worked in the garden and later, learning to fish and hunt at his side. Like his mother and father, his grandfather had died far too early. Mason cleared the dirt from what was left of his body and climbed out of the hole. He trudged back to the house, feeling a little guilty for tracking mud on the gleaming floors, and into the bedroom where his Nana lay. She was beautiful, looking peaceful, as though she had only fallen asleep. He knelt beside the bed, reaching up for the talisman she wore around her neck. It was a dark stone, barely the size of a $50, and carved with a symbol that represented the Jerah family. His grandfather had carved it before they were wed, the stone taken from the family hearth in the old country. Mason removed it carefully, kissing the stone before lifting the leather cord and sliding it over his head. The stone sat heavily against his chest as he stood and prepared his Nana to join her husband. When he had wrapped her securely in a sheet, Mason carried her out to the graveyard and gently lowered her in to lie atop his grandfather's remains. For a long moment, he knelt beside the grave. Memories spilled through him, of other graves, other losses, back through time. The sun would be rising soon. Gathering himself, Mason stood and covered the bodies with dirt. He was weary as he returned to the small house, his heart heavy with loneliness. He showered and crawled into his bed, closing his eyes against the pain. "You are not alone." Mason sat up, half certain the voice had been spoken, but he was alone in the room. Slowly, he lay back down, reaching inside him for the voice. In the dark, he could see others, shades. They were scattered. Each line had taken its own path centuries before, but they weren't all broken. "You must find the Book of Line. You must carry the line forward," the voices inside whispered to him, carrying him off to sleep, to dream of times when whole families came together to learn and teach, when the gifts a shade can bring were welcomed into the world and not feared. Mason woke shortly before the sun went down, filled with an urgency to find his grandmother's book. She had kept it hidden from him, afraid he would learn from it and somehow expose them. He dressed quickly and went into her bedroom. It still smelled of her as he turned on the lights. There wasn't much in the room that he wasn't familiar with. Her bed and nightstand, her antique dresser and mirror, all had stood in their place since she had been a girl.